Hello, nutrition enthusiasts, and welcome to the Diet NPL podcast. My name is Zach, and I'll be your host. Welcome to episode 20, everyone. It feels crazy that we've done 20 episodes already of this, helping people to prepare for the RD exam, helping with tutoring, and just to get better as a dietitian, or just in nutrition in general. As of today, I have 4,000 listens on the Diet NPO podcast, and that feels really great. Now, to be clear, a listen only counts as about 30 seconds or more. So this could just mean 4,000 people who could only take about 31 seconds of my voice, and then they decided to move on. But I'll slow down on the self-deprecation, and I will just take my win wherever I can. As a special treat to you listeners, I wanted to offer a drawing to win 2 hours of free tutoring with me. All you have to do is you have to go to my Instagram at Zak_snacks. You have to look for the post for episode 20, and you need to share it to your story so that you can spread the word a little bit. The drawing for this will be called on November 30th of 2022. So right at the end of the month here, I'll kind of call the drawing, and you kind of, as by posting that, you get to enter for a chance to win those 2 free tutoring hours, which I'll reach out to you about if you are the winner. Appreciate all your support. Keep it coming. Today is one of those days where my partner took her car, the car that we're still sharing, and I decided to take my bike everywhere else throughout town. The only problem is when I'm tutoring or working out, I kind of need to be able to get from point A to point B a lot quicker. So today what I decided to do is I said, hey, I'll just bring all my resources with me to the gym and I'll do my tutoring there in the common space. So after a long shoulders and arm workout, I decided I would meet with my student in that kind of common place of my gym, which felt super weird because it's kind of like I'm out there talking about digestive habits, vitamins and minerals, organ systems, and people are kind of looking at me with a very strange look a lot of the time, but I don't really mind as long as I have some good enough internet to be meeting with people. But since this is going to be our episode 20, I thought we would make it a special episode to make it all about labs. Labs being a big thing that most of my students struggle with in one way or another, whether it's you didn't have a good clinical experience or you just haven't been able to put the pieces of the puzzle together to figure out these labs. Now, I won't be presenting the numbers of the labs because I don't really want to bore you or act like you're going to have to know all those. And for your sanity, I think let's just make sure we understand them. But I'd like to dive into all of these labs together so we can all get better about the mystery of lab values. Let's start by getting just a little bit bloody here together and discussing the labs of the blood and the anemias. This consists of hemoglobin, hematocrit, MCV, all of these ones here. Starting with hemoglobin. This is a protein of the blood, and it's a big one that we see because it's so important. It's a protein in the blood that helps bring that rich red color to our blood there. It's a major part of hemoglobin is the iron, so the iron helps with the maturity of that cell. So you can think of iron deficiency, anemias, and pale cells a lot of the time. A low hemoglobin points to an iron deficiency anemia or blood loss in general. And high could be due to dehydration, sickle cell anemia, or hemolysis. Hematocrit is the volume of red blood cells in your blood, and this is expressed as a percentage. It should register with you that if there's a low percentage of red blood cells in blood, then that's probably going to be pointing towards some anemias. Such anemias, blood losses, renal disorders, because maybe that erythropoietin that our kidneys produce to make red blood cells, if our kidneys suck, maybe we're not going to make that EPO so well. High could be due to some blood cancers. I know I've certainly seen at the cancer center, some people will have like a high hemoglobin, which feels so weird with cancer patients because all of their labs suck always. But sometimes you'll see a high hemoglobin and you're like, wow, that's so interesting. But it's really due to those blood disorders. Now, turn up the volume here because we're talking about mean corpuscular volume. And this is literally the mean size of that red blood cell. This helps us differentiate between a microcytic, small, or a macrocytic, large, type of anemia. Remember that high kind of mean corpuscular volume is due to B12 or folate deficiencies. So you're going to see a really big giant cell in the size of a high MCV for B12 and folate. No offense to the moms to be, but my trick to remembering the folate And the large kind of MCV there is I think of pregnant women and their kind of larger stomachs. So sorry, no offense, don't come after me. Iron deficiency is when these cells are itty bitty and they're very pale a lot of the time as well. So when I think of those types of iron deficiency type cells there, I think of skinny, pale white girls when I think of iron deficiency. And that would point to kind of that low MCV a lot of the time. Now, to round out these anemias, let's talk a little bit about iron specifically. One of the things that we learn about is transferrin, and transferrin is the transporter of iron in the blood. Picture it like this. High transferrin means that there is not a lot of iron to bind to, so it's just free floating everywhere. The analogy I literally just came up with is picture like a taxi. A taxi helps to pick people up, and if there is no one to pick up, those taxis are usually everywhere a lot of the time. Whereas if they're all full, the taxis are never there when you need them. And a low transferrin a lot of the time is due to stress, burns, different types of inflammation, because transferrin is a protein in the blood, and much like any other protein such as albumin, it's going to decrease in a state of stress. Hope that makes sense there. Another one is total iron binding capacity. This is our ability of the iron to bind with that transferrin there. It should be kind of self-explanatory that if we're having issues binding those two, a low TIBC or total iron binding capacity would be due to an iron deficiency. That's kind of what it makes sense, and the low is probably what I would pay the most amount of attention to in this case. The final one is ferritin, the stored form of iron. So you can naturally think that if we have a low amount of iron stores due to chronic anemia, then that would point to kind of low ferric iron, and that would be low amount of stores, most likely being our anemias there. It only gets easier from here, folks. Let's make sure you know about your blood cholesterols as well. Total cholesterol is the amount of good and bad cholesterol in the blood. So it is both the HDL and the LDL cholesterol put together. So someone could have a super high LDL and have high cholesterol, or super high HDL and have high cholesterol. But usually it's when we think of that high amount of LDL, right? And high cholesterol is most usually associated with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, and low cholesterol being in a case of malnutrition, malabsorption, infection, or liver disease, because we know that the liver is such a big component of cholesterol in its synthesis and its processing, right? So if my liver sucks, maybe I'm not going to be able to produce that much cholesterol anyway. Now to the LDL, aka the loser cholesterol as it's also known. This is the bad cholesterol, and when it's high, it's usually due to cardiovascular disease, due to a heart attack, diabetes, possibly to nephrotic syndrome, because again, it's low density lipoprotein, so it's a protein. Nephrotic syndrome is when we're urinating out a lot of our proteins, and so that could cause us to have a low LDL in that case, possibly. Now HDL is going to be that, and of course, if I have a low LDL a lot of the time, we can see kind of why that would be too. If I have good diet, if I have exercise, if I'm on statins, my LDL would normally be low. High would be due to that heart disease. Now let's go to the HDL, also known as the happy cholesterol a lot of the time. These are our garbage trucks that are just picking up that trash all throughout our blood. We want this high, ideally, so that if it's high, it's going to be kind of properly doing its job of picking up all that trash. It would be high due to a lot of times if I have a good diet, or if I exercise, or if I have a good family history. It'll be low if I'm usually inactive, have poor dietary habits, diabetes, nephrotic syndrome, etc. for that case. Another one is our triglycerides here, which transport our fatty acids in the blood. And we don't want to have tons of fatty acids just sitting in the blood, do we? So ideally, we'd like this to be low or controlled. This can be high due to like alcohol intake, high sugar intake. Let's see some other things here. A lot of that type of stuff, like drinking, eating lots of sugar. Low triglycerides are usually due to things such as, low-fat diet, having a proper diet, some malnutrition type stuff may lead to a low amount of triglycerides as well. I want to also talk about sugars a little more, and that's because of blood sugars. You should know that your blood glucose is pretty well as, high blood glucose is usually indicative of diabetes, steroid use, stress, obesity. Why would it be low? Well, it's going to be low usually due to a low carbohydrate diet, possibly. Maybe you're on a keto diet. You could have liver issues, starvation. That's why you would normally have a low blood glucose. But what if we want more of an average of our blood glucose over time? That's when we're going to go to our A1C. Hemoglobin A1C is how we diagnose our diabetes. So anything that's over 6.5% is considered high, and that would be indicative of diabetes. It would be a low A1C due to possibly a chronically low carbohydrate diet. So sometimes I'll see someone with a A1C of like 4.9% because they just don't eat enough, or maybe they have malnutrition and really their blood sugars are always low, low, low. And they feel terrible all the time too. Whew. Let's take a breath. Go ahead and clear your mind a little bit of all those labs that we just rattled off. And do what your kidneys do, which is filter out the waste of the stuff that you kind of already know. We use the GFR, or the glomerular filtration rate. I have to say it slow or else I'm going to have to say it twice, 3 times sometimes. This is the filtration rate that says how efficient our kidneys do at filtering out waste of the body. I kind of think of RPMs as, reps per minute, or repetitions per minute. That's kind of the whole thought of like how fast, our tire is usually turning here. A high GFR means we have great, efficient kidneys. Usually we say if it's greater than 125, that's about normal for your GFR. Now, if yours is like 110, 111, don't worry, it's going to be okay. But a low GFR is usually indicative then of kidney disease, we always think of. So that's kind of the thought there. Now, when we are in that low GFR, again, our kidneys are not filtering out that waste very quickly. So we see a lot of those waste products build up in the blood, one of which being our blood urea nitrogen. That's going to be one that builds up in the blood. BUN is that byproduct of protein metabolism through the urea cycle in the liver. Now, normally, my kidneys are good. I'm going to pee this right on out of there. But if my kidneys suck, then I'm not going to be able to get it out of there as well. So a high BUN would usually point to possibly a high protein diet because we're producing a lot more urea. It could be due to kidney disease, or it could be due to infection or some dehydration. Sometimes I'll see dehydration a lot too. Low would be due to a low protein diet, malnutrition, liver failure, since the liver really is the one that produces a lot of that urea in there. Another one is creatinine. Now, a lot of students mix this up. You can think of creatinine and creatine that people take to build muscle up as a supplement as being kind of similar, but really in the body they're not at all. They just kind of share kind of similar traits. The thought is that we take creatine as a supplement to help build up muscle. Creatinine is a byproduct of muscle breakdown. So that's kind of the thought. They both are related to muscle. Creatinine is high, usually due to dehydration, kidney disease, because we cannot move it out of the blood or pee it out, rapid muscle loss, and could be low due to chronically low muscle mass or inadequate amounts of protein intake. A lot of my chronically malnourished patients have a really low creatinine a lot of the time because they really don't have a lot of muscle to break down in the first place. They have no muscle left to break down, so their creatinine is really kind of low a lot of the time. Are you labbed out yet? Well, that's just too dang bad, because it'll never end. We're always going to have to work on these. We have our electrolytes as well, starting with our sodium levels. Now, with sodium on the test, you really should be thinking of hydration status as being the thing that it's going to be most related to. Let's picture a big glass of water here, and I have a bunch of salt in there as well. Now, if I go ahead and I fill that glass up all the way with more water, the level of sodium or salt in there is going to be very, very low, right? This is usually when we see that our sodium levels are low, because this will usually be due to, it's going to be low a lot of the times due to overhydration, such as edema. It could be due to diuresis, stress, possibly things like that could cause that. And high amounts of sodium are usually going to be due to dehydration, diabetes, and that's kind of the thought there. Picture we took that glass of water, we drained all the water out, now there's just a ton of salt in the bottom, and that's what's making my sodium levels look so high. How about potassium, our other major cation that we think of kind of like with our cells? Well, we know that potassium's a big one, and we sometimes think about it with kidney disease as well. Potassium is normally going to be high in a state of kidney disease, dehydration, infection, or maybe having too many fruits or vegetables with kidney disease. A lot of the times, someone on dialysis will eat way too many fruits and vegetables, they'll end up with a high potassium, and then they're having to restrict these things even more. Could be low due to diarrhea. Maybe we lost so much and we were not able to absorb it in the colon. Diuresis, stress, or low intake of those potassium type foods. Calcium does not get enough credit. It gets so much credit for its, a lot of times with the bone stuff, but it doesn't get enough credit for our muscle contraction, also for our blood clotting pathways. It's huge for a lot of that stuff too. High calcium can be due to things such as cancer, hyperparathyroidism, where that calcium is leaving the bone and going out into the blood, bone diseases as well, and could be low due to a vitamin D deficiency, low calcium intake, and some renal disorders as well, where we might lose too much calcium. Sometimes someone will be on a diuretic that'll cause them to lose too much calcium as well. So maybe that's just another example for you. Magnesium is one that is very close to my heart. It's because a lot of the time, because I think of our cancer patients, a ton of my cancer patients have low amounts of potassium, especially those that are on tube feeds. Even though we're giving them a ton of magnesium through their tube feeds, they still are just chronically low because they don't eat a lot of magnesium type foods. It'll be high due to dehydration, renal impairment, and it'll be low in a state of stress, malnutrition, low intake, and refeeding syndrome, because we always think of those labs going down, 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 right? As well as low intake, such as if you're not eating lots of legumes, greens, nuts, like a lot of my cancer patients normally kind of avoid or don't do. Phosphorus is another one that we think of with kidney disease. When in a state of high intake, it'll usually be high in a state of kidney disease. Hypoparathyroidism also can cause high amounts of phosphorus as well. Low can be due to low intake, malnutrition, hyperparathyroidism, as well as refeeding syndrome. It's always going to go down, 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 right, when we're in refeeding. Home stretch here as we talk about our last kind of miscellaneous labs to throw out here. Also about carbon dioxide. We've talked a lot about carbon dioxide when we talk about our acidosis versus our alkalosis. We know that high levels of carbon dioxide in the blood will be due to possibly COPD, where you have this slow, labored breathing, and you're building up and holding on to a lot of that carbon dioxide. That'll lead us a lot of times into that respiratory acidosis, and low levels will be due to hyperventilation, where we're losing too much carbon dioxide, and then we're ending up in alkalosis as a result there. Another one that we're going to talk about is bicarb. Now, bicarb is our base. So we know that high levels can be due to alkalosis and low levels in acidosis. When it comes to our blood protein, such as albumin, we know that's a huge one. We need to think about it as being very similar to that of sodium, because we know a ton of the time that albumin with hydration, it's going to look very low when I have tons of edema, and it's going to look very high when I'm very, very dehydrated as well. Other reasons it might be high could be due to, possibly high protein diets isn't really going to be associated with that, but it's a maybe. It's not the first thing we think of. Low will again be due to that edema, ascites, possibly low protein intake, and inflammation, because we know albumin is one of those negative acute phase reactants. It decreases in a state of stress, just like transferrin did, remember? The other one is prealbumin. This is another protein in the blood that actually transports vitamin A, and it acts just the same as albumin. It's going to decrease in stress, and it's going to increase in a state of dehydration. Finally, one more stress protein to talk about here. This is known as our C-reactive protein, which is a positive acute phase reactant. It actually goes up in a state of stress, and in a state of lack of stress or normal amounts, we're going to see a pretty low CRP relative to all those other things. Today on the What's Eating You segment, I want to talk about homemade pizza, as sometimes I get sick of ordering out, things are getting so expensive as everyone just talks about all the time, or just eating another frozen pizza at home. I'm getting kind of sick of it a lot of the time. We buy yeast by the jar because we just love making bread, love making our own baked products so much. This recipe makes 2 pizza doughs because the only thing better than 1 pizza is 2. We start by doing about 1 1/3 cup of very warm water. Usually they say about 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, I do measure the temperature. Yes, I am crazy. I usually just crank my sink all the way up to its hottest temperature, and then I just basically take that 1 1/3 cup in a Pyrex jar. Then I'll add 1 serving or 1 packet of the yeast to that. Usually that's about 2.25 teaspoons or so. And then we let that yeast take about 5 minutes to begin to mix with the water and form some of that carbon dioxide. Usually you'll see a couple bubbles start to kind of produce on the top, and that's that carbon dioxide being produced from that yeast. After we let that ferment, and while we're doing that, we're going to get a mixing bowl and we're going to add 3.5 cups of flour, 2 teaspoons of salt, 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and optional if you want to add a little bit of sugar to it too. We're going to add that yeast water mixture to our dry ingredients, and we're going to take about 5 minutes in our stand mixer or by hand. I'm just lazy, so I like to use the stand mixer, and so I let the dough hook basically work on it for about 5 minutes or so. After that, I'm going to transfer it to a greased and covered bowl so that I can kind of go find the warmest part of my house, of this freezing house right now, and I'm going to give it about 90 minutes or so to let that yeast begin to kind of continue to ferment, and I'm going to wait until that dough basically doubles in size so it can get nice, big, and bulky. Once we're at that 90 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and punch that dough down to spread that carbon dioxide all over the rest of it. Kind of spread those air bubbles all throughout so we get that nice crispy texture, good tasting dough there. Then I'm going to let it rest for about 10 to 15 minutes more before adding my favorite toppings and sauce. For us, that's usually bell peppers, pepperoni, mozzarella, basil, mushroom, onions, just to name a few, but you choose, of course, to add whatever you like. Pop that in a hot oven at 475 degrees, and in 15 minutes, you'll have your own delicious thin crust pizza that always tastes better than what you got in the store or what you ordered out. That does it for the What's Eating You segment today and the Diet NPO podcast. Don't forget you can win 2 free tutoring hours with me. Just go to my Instagram, Zak_snacks, follow me, and share my episode 20 post to your story for a chance to win 2 free tutoring hours. This drawing is going to be called at the end on November 30th. That'll be the end of it, so feel free to keep posting after that if you'd like. Don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, keep listening, and hey, have a great day.